There we go. Thank you very, very much indeed. Great to be with you today. Who am I is essentially the question we're going to be looking at during the course of the next 20 minutes. After that, we'll love to hear your thoughts, have your questions, and a time to hear back from you. But the next kind of 20 minutes or so, we're going to be discussing the question, who am I? It's possibly one of the most fundamental of questions, isn't it? Maybe that's why you've come to university. That's the question you want figuring out by the end of these 3 years. Now, I imagine most of you have seen the film Les Miserables. It's this glorious film. I've seen it twice now. And in it, the main character explores the very question, who am I? It's all right, I will spare you the song, which will be great for both of us. But in it, he explores who he really is. First off, is he simply 24601, the number, the slave, the one who is kind of less than human, the one who Javert treats as a slave and always will treat as a slave and a criminal, someone who's defined by his crime and these 5 digits of disdain? Or is he Jean Valjean? Is he the man? Is he the one who stole a loaf of bread, but essentially he was trying to help his sister and he's trying to be this good person? Jean Valjean is the one who tries to recreate himself constantly, trying to escape from his past and carve a better future. Or is he Monsieur Madeleine, who is the one who runs a workhouse and creates jobs for people, the one who shows grace in the face of revenge, who deals mercifully with his enemies, the one who looks after the orphan and the widow, the one who deals with kindness, the one who fights against injustice. So I wonder in our quest of who we are, whether we face those kind of 3 separate people. Are we just a number, this figure of disdain? Are we basically the essence of our past, perhaps? Or are we just a bag? Are we just the kind of what we can touch and feel and know? Or is there something of substance and significance about us? Someone who is capable of great good, of great good in this world? Now, Shakespeare, through Hamlet, ponders the same question. And he says this, he says, what a piece of work is a man. How noble in reason, how infinite in faculty, in form, in moving, how express and admirable. In action, how like an angel. In apprehension, how like a god. The beauty of the world, the paragon of animals. And yet to me, what is this quintessence of dust? And here's the quandary that we are going to explore today. The quandary of, are we just the substance of what we're made of? Or is there more? For Hamlet, what is it to me, this quintessence of dust, this bag of dust? But how are we the beauty of the world? What piece of work is a person? Now, for others, they have drawn a more honest conclusion from their worldviews and more consistently, but it is somewhat bleak. Francis Crick, who was the Nobel Prize winner for his discovery of DNA, concludes this about you: not that you are the beauty of the world, but rather you, your joys and sorrows, your memories and ambitions, your sense of personal identity and free will, are in fact no more than the behaviour of a vast assembly of nerve cells and their associated molecules. So in our modern quest for identity, we face a similar dilemma. Who are we? A number? Cells and matter? DNA? Or the beauty of the world? The paragon of animals? Or something else? Now, I want to suggest, as we explore these 2 things in 2 main areas, that we live as if we have significance and being. But I want to challenge us to suggest where we get that from today. So we're going to look at two main areas. Let's start with one of the most fundamental of our society, namely that we have rights. That I have rights, that you have rights, that the rights give us a great sense of dignity and protect us and keep us from harming each other. But this is what Nietzsche said. And have a listen. He says, if God is dead, any and all morality of love and human rights is baseless. If there is no God, there can be no good reason to be kind, to be loving, or to work for peace. It's fairly bleak. But he is right. You see, if there is no God, if God is dead, there really isn't any basis for universal human rights at all. We have to conclude that if God doesn't give people meaning, well, I have to give myself meaning. Or other people have to give me meaning and they become my God. If there's no higher absolute, if there's no greater being, then essentially all our morality are creations of culture and a creation of our time. It's just an opinion. But in the 21st century, the law professor Michael J. Perry has so accurately described human rights and defined them like this. He says, human rights are that every human being has inherent dignity and that it is obligatory that we order our lives in accordance with this fact. It is wrong to violate the equal dignity of another human being. And that's what we would probably adhere to. Yet, without a God, then we have to say that these conclusions are only our conclusions at this point in time and in history and in space. So essentially, in our part of the world that we live, these might be great conclusions, but we have no right, without a universal God, to insist this on any culture or on any other time of history. Essentially, to put a finer point on it, we have really no basis to say that the Syrian killings are wrong, or even to go back to Nazi Germany and to say that they were wrong. We have to conclude that these are all opinions that that we've designed from a collective humanity. We have no external reference points to give our finite reference point any meaning. But it rubs, doesn't it? It is very uncomfortable to conclude this. You see, we may believe that God is dead, but we don't want to live up to Nietzsche's conclusions. We want to believe in the inherent dignity of human beings. But how are we going to do it? Arthur Alan Leff published in an article called Unspeakable Ethics and Unnatural Law, he said this. He said, I want to believe, and so do you, in a complete, transcendent and immanent set of propositions about right and wrong. Findable rules that authoritatively and unambiguously direct us how to live righteously. Okay? So he's saying, in which case, we want a set of rules that are given to us from outside. A God figure would be the only kind of person who could grant us such status. And he's saying, essentially, we want these things. That's what we want. But he continues. He says, I also want to believe, and so do you, apparently, in no such thing. But rather we are wholly free, not only to choose for ourselves what we ought to do, but to decide for ourselves, individually and as a species, what we ought to be. We want, heaven help us, what we want, heaven help us, is simultaneously to be perfectly ruled and perfectly free. That is, at the same time, to discover the right and the good and to create it. He says we want it both ways. We want the God figure to give us a set of rules so that we can live accordingly and live righteously. We want to be ruled, but also we want to be the God figure who creates our own freedom and our own rights and our own way to live our lives. Problem is, we can't have it both ways. Either man is given some divine stamp of nobility, of value, of worth, of substance, apart from who I am, or my capacities, or my place in history, or my place in a family. Or humanity is simply just a more advanced part of all of human life on this planet. And we must adhere to the laws of life in the animal kingdom as well as within humanity. And yet those lives, that life, thrives on violence, on the strong overcoming the weak and devouring them, on the disabled and the maimed being left and discarded. You see, Leff admits either God exists or he does not. But if he does not exist, nothing and no one can take his place. Anything that took his place would also be him. Now, essentially, our kind of grasp at human rights, that human rights give humanity inherent dignity, is a mini replacement of God. It's trying to say that we all have human dignity and we all have value. But the problem is that we essentially live in an atheistic world and we carry on taking moral judgments for granted. We kind of really draw on the implication that Nietzsche, we haven't really lived up to the implications that Nietzsche spelled out at the beginning. If God is dead, there is no basis for human morality. A Christian writer, Dr. Timothy Keller, says this. He says, if you believe human rights are a reality, then it makes more sense that God exists than that he does not. If you insist on a secular view of the world and yet you continue to pronounce some things right and some things wrong, well then I hope you see the deep disharmony between the world your intellect has devised and the real world that your heart knows exists. Friends, it comes as no surprise to you that I am a Christian and that I do believe in God and the significance that he alone gives humanity. You see, the Christian perspective states essentially that there are no mere mortals, that you sit next to someone of substance and significance, of value. Another Christian writer, Os Guinness, describes humans as this. He says, all men and women are portraits of God. Not clones, not all the same, but unique artistic renderings, each designed to bring out on the finite plane certain features of the infinitely majestic and gracious original. So who am I? We're a bag of dust or a portrait of God himself. We're either made to survive or we're made to know God individually. We're either a replica in miniature of the divine or a bag of DNA. But we can't have it both ways. Now look, if we're getting a bit technical for lunchtime, and then let's consider something a bit closer to our heart, shall we? Let's consider the act of love. You see, who am I? Well, I know I love, and love is significant. And in some ways, I don't know about you, but it feels as though our society holds out the greatest hope in romance and love than kind of ever before. Love is that which is able to rescue you from everything, to conquer all, to transform the most terrible tragedy, to give hope in the darkness, that can change everything. And this is a theme picked up in kind of every film alive, but the most common at the moment is a film called Warm Bodies. I'm not quite sure if you've seen it yet. But this is a story about a world of zombies, essentially. And here he is, Mr. Zombie, who walks around lifeless in the kind of truest of senses, wandering around an airport terminal, existing but not relating, moving but not breathing. Until, yes, you guessed it, a woman comes along who is fully human and alive. And essentially through this relationship begins to wake the zombie up. You see, the message of the film is love can really bring you back from the dead, it seems. Love can really reverse the tide of death. And here it is, love is that which conquers everything. Or we think of, countless films, but even the film The Notebook. It's a story of a lady who is in the depths of dementia, and she's asked her husband to keep reading her a story in the hope that a story of love would wake her up from dementia. And in the film you see that happening. That for 10 minutes she's awakened from the deep dementia that she suffers by following the thread of the story, the love story of their lives. Now, it's not just romantic love. For Jean Valjean, loving Cosette was that which kind of turned his life around and gave him a purpose. You see, it was the love and the grace of the minister who recreated Jean Valjean. And this is what he sings in the song Suddenly, after he's managed to take the little orphan Cosette and adopt her. And he says this: "You have warmed my heart like the sun. You have brought the gift of life. And love so long denied me. Suddenly I see what I could not see. Suddenly, something has begun." So love comes into his world, he says, and nothing's the same. I wonder if that's how your experiences of love have been. Something has begun. But what is this something? You see, perhaps you would say that love, well, it's just a means of survival. It's useful to get us through life. A way that, we propagate our species and we don't get wiped out. You can't really imagine it becoming part of our marital vows, can you? I said at the beginning, I'm a wedding photographer, and the moment of the vows are a very, very solemn moment, wherever they are. But you can never imagine them being changed to say, I take you for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, but essentially just to propagate my own species. I mean, you can't really imagine that happening. But if we don't believe in God, all of life and joys and love, well, they are just a combination of ourselves. And we really shouldn't attach much significance to them beyond, the act of tying a shoelace. It's just something we do to get things done. Now, C.S. Lewis describes this dilemma. He says this, except you can't, except in the lowest animal sense, be in love with a girl if you know and keep on remembering that all the beauties of her person and her character are a momentary and accidental pattern produced by the collision of atoms, and that your response to them is only a sort of psychic phosphorescence arriving from the behaviour of your genes. You see, we don't long for love in the lowest animal sense, do we? Even if we try to live like it, it doesn't really fit. There's a Cambridge Don who was a professor in philosophy, and he was picked up a guy in his car as they were driving across Europe, and he and his wife were in the front, and he was quizzed about his view of the universe. And his view of the universe was that it essentially is reducible to biochemical responses in every kind of scenario. And he was asked in a car journey with his wife, okay, so listen, you've been married for 30 years. After all these years of marriage, has there really been nothing more to your relationship than biochemical reactions and the illusion of love and caring? Yes, said the Don, you're absolutely right. That's all it's been. His wife, on the other hand, burst into floods of tears, sat next to him. You see, like the issue of human rights, we may adhere to one thing in practice, but we have no principle for it, and it rubs. It doesn't quite fit the reality that we long for. You see, we value love, we value compassion and friendship, trust and fidelity. But on the basis of a reductionistic philosophy, things simply should not have this meaning. Now again, I think the irony is that in our culture, in our modern society, love and romance has never been held more highly than ever before in its capacity for what it could do to transform your life. It's certainly never just continually thought of as a biochemical reaction, an illusion. Now, Ernest Becker, he wrote the Pulitzer Prize winning book called The Denial of Death. And in it, he explores our significance in the world and the world we face now with the inevitability of death. So he's a cultural anthropologist and an evolutionary psychologist, not writing from a Christian perspective. And this is what he says. He says, we still need to feel that our life matters in the grand scheme of things. We still want to merge ourselves with some higher, self-absorbing meaning in trust and gratitude. But if we no longer have God, how are we to do this? Now, in his book, he explores and draws on the writing of Otto Ranks, who basically saw that the modern person now, who doesn't believe in God, looks to the romantic solution to fix all that we lose in terms of meaning. If God doesn't give us meaning, well then our partner will. And Becker continues. He says, what is it that we want when we elevate the love partner to this position? Well, we want to be rid of our faults. We want to be rid of our feeling of nothingness. We want to be justified. We want to know our existence hasn't been in vain. We want redemption, nothing less. So the modern solution for us is that love rescues us from nothingness, that love can do it. It makes me feel as though I matter. And yet the concern for Becker and other modern psychologists is that we are replacing a God figure with our love partners. It's a tall order. To look at the person that you love and say, you are the one who redeems me. You are the one who takes me out of the meaninglessness of this world. You are the one who has to do it. And Becker concludes that it is impossible. He concludes that no relationship can bear the weight of godhood, as he describes it. So what do we do? You see, either we insist in there being no God, but we pursue love in spite of our philosophy saying that essentially love is nothing. Or I wonder if I could persuade you to consider that our longing for love, our longing for redemption, if you like, could be the clue that points us to there being a God. You see, the Bible describes God of great love and God of community. Father, Son, Spirit, in love, loving, being loved and loving the other. And in that image, so are we. And so because Christians believe in a God, because God who is truly there, I know that when I love another, it is significant because in some small way it echoes the image of the God that I bear. I don't love someone and say, do you know what? Don't count on it, it's nothing but chemicals. We can love and receive love knowing that it weighs something, it is significant. Now, look, this may not prove to you that there is a God at all, and that's okay, but certainly what I wanted to do is suggest that we try to live as though there is one. And if that's the way we live, if that's what's meaningful and significant, if that's the way that we raise our children, that we relate to our parents, perhaps it gives us ground to question our presuppositions. You see, why is our starting point there definitely cannot be a God, when our value of life and our enjoyment of love hint that there is? What if we were at least open to the possibility, even the probability of God? Well, then the question becomes, what kind of God is really there? And what does he think of me? You see, imagine a mother who sees the talent in her 3-year-old child at his piano playing. Imagine she works night and day to pay for lessons. Imagine then she works harder to pay for a studio space for him to practice. Imagine she takes on a night shift to save up for a real piano at home. Imagine she denies herself all luxuries to provide everything she can for her child. And then at university, as people praise him for such skills, he denies all trace of his mother and refuses to admit that his genius may lie in part to her provision. Be profoundly ungrateful, don't you think? A bit dishonest to deny that she's given him everything and taken everything that she's given him. And yet, that's a description of living our lives, enjoying the thing that God has given us, without really being honest to the God who's really given us everything in the first place. Perhaps that is the way we live. We can come back to questions on that later. But as I close, one of my greatest film moments was that when a friend of mine and I, we went to this great art house cinema in London, and we were watching this film called A Guide to Recognising Your Saints. I really doubt if anyone's seen it, but it was this really gritty drama about kids growing up in the Bronx in New York, and looking at their lives of gun crime, and it was pretty gritty. Anyway, at the end, as the credits rolled, all of a sudden, I recognised the name. And there's Cordelia Stevens at Belladonna Productions in New York. So a friend of mine from university, I knew she'd been working on a film, but I'd completely forgotten. And there it was, her name in lights, very exciting. And when I asked her about what her role was on that film, she's like, well, product placement, essentially. Now, what she would do is pick up all the products, put them in the film, place them, and arrange for the set to be, dressed accordingly. And there weren't many calls for companies requesting to have their labels placed on the urban streets of gun crime America, but you get the idea. Product placement is big business, from interiors to fashion houses. I mean, clothing labels send their clothing to the rich and famous for free in the hope that they'd wear it, in the hope that stars that wear your clothes, high praise indeed, that they would consider your clothes worthy of being worn. Now that speaks volumes. You see, if there is a God, which Christians undisputedly claim there is, what kind of God is he? Well, he's a God who has worn our product, essentially. He has worn our skin. In Jesus, the assertion is that he has known our humanity. He has lived with our bodies. He knows what it's like to be human. He's taken on our substance and worn us. So, for the Christian, being human is no mere thing. Even God has worn our stuff, has taken on our nature, that we would really know him. And that's what the Christian Union are here to explore this week, both in lunchtimes and in evenings. So we're going to leave it there. What we're going to give